victim blamer claim that you are codependent, that you in some way deserved the abuse, or that it was your fault, let them know. Codependency was a term historically used to describe interactions between addicts and enablers, not victims and abusers. Contrary to popular myth, anyone can be victimized by an abuser. In fact, narcissistic abusers often gravitate towards the strengths of the victim that they choose to victimize. They choose someone with assets, with talents, with status, with power, with financial resources. They want to associate themselves with someone special and unique. So remember that the next time you're being accused of being a perfect target for an abuser, because that might in fact be a compliment. Covert abuse is insidious and unbelievably traumatic. It involves the slow erosion of boundaries over time. The abuser tests and pushes the boundaries of the victim once that victim has already been conned into the sham of a relationship. Meanwhile, the victim is like a frog in slowly boiling water, gaslit into believing that it is all their fault, not knowing the danger they're in until it's too late. It is not the victim's fault for choosing the abuser, because victims rarely consciously choose an abuser. There is only one person who can control the abuse, and that is the abuser alone. They choose someone who appears rather kind, caring, and compassionate on the onset. The victim falls in love and invests in the false mask an abuser portrays, and rarely their true selves. It is only when they are invested in the relationship that the mask begins to slip and the terror begins. Once someone has been traumatized again and again by someone who has claimed to love them, once an abuser has warped the victim's reality and caused him or her to mistrust their perceptions through gaslighting and projection, once a victim has been made to believe that he or she is worthless, they are already traumatically bonded to their abusers. It takes a great deal of professional support, personal support, validation, resources in order for the victim to finally detach from the abuser, leave, and heal. It is not codependency that we're talking about when it comes to abusers and their victims. There is no enabling of the abuse, merely a need to survive in a hostile environment and a clear power imbalance between abuser and victim. Not in this case. In this case, it does not take two to tango, because this is a survival mechanism known as trauma bonding, and victim blamers ought to educate themselves, because anyone can be made to act or appear like they're codependent simply by being traumatized in the first place. As you learned in my article, Your Brain on Love, Sex, and the Narcissist, as well as my book, Becoming the Narcissist Nightmare, abuse has traumatic effects on the brain, tying us physiologically, biochemically, and psychologically with our abusers. It has very little to do with codependency and everything to do with the traumatic nature of the abuse and the severity of it. Even if you feel you have codependent traits, perhaps you had an upbringing that was abusive. None of the abuse, whether in childhood or adulthood, was your fault. In my article about simultaneous wounding, I mentioned that victims of childhood abuse can be primed for abuse in adulthood because they're programmed to expect less from people. They're programmed to have their boundaries already eroded. Just because abusers can pick up on that does not mean that it is your fault that you are abused or re-traumatized. In fact, it makes the abuser 10 times worse because they are trying to choose someone who has already been abused. At the end of the day, the blame belongs to the perpetrator. You are not the enabler of the abuser simply for being traumatized. You are a victim who has been traumatically bonded to an abuser as an effort to survive your experience. Understand the trauma bond, and you will understand how it is different from your actual feelings of disgust, anger, and pain that you feel towards your abuser and the abuse experience. Your authentic feelings about your abuser are buried beneath the apparently inextricable bond that you have with your abuser. In order to extricate yourself, you must develop a separation, a healthy emotional separation between this apparent bond that keeps you two together and your actual reality, your actual experience of the abuse. Holding on to the reality of the abuse that you've experienced, as well as your true feelings about it, is one of the most important things you can do in order to resist the gaslighting effect. The bond may keep you attached for now, but it is possible to sever it with time, with practice, with resources, with validation and support, and regain your power. Be sure to check out my #1 Amazon best-selling book, Becoming the Narcissist's Nightmare: How to Devalue and Discard the Narcissist While Supplying Yourself. Also be sure to reserve your signed copy of my newest book, Power: Surviving and Thriving After Narcissistic Abuse. The links will be provided in the description below.